Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. The National Corn-to-Ethanol Research Center is located on the campus of Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. The NCERC is the only facility dedicated to researching the methodology of converting corn to ethanol. It contains an analytical lab, a fermentation lab, and a pilot-scale production plant for performing research and training workers for the biofuel industry. Our guest today, John Caupert, has been its executive director since 2006. Mr. Caupert has more than 2 decades experience in the agriculture and biofuels industry. During this half hour, we will discuss the value of the National Corn-to-Ethanol Research Center to Metro East and to SIUE. John Caupert, welcome to Conversation.
Thanks for having me, Lee. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Well, I guess we'll just start right there at the end of that at that commentary about you. Is what's the value of the National Corn-to-Ethanol Research Center?
Well, you know, Lee, I think there's really three ways to measure the value. We can talk about the local value, we can talk about the value that it brings to the region and the state, and we can talk about the value that it brings to the nation as a whole. While we are geographically local, we're very national, in fact, international in scope.
Explain to people briefly who know nothing about this.
Right.
What do you do there?
Yeah, well, we were developed, if you will, out of the research title of the 1997 Farm Bill. It took a few years for the facility to be built. We opened our doors for operation in 2003 with the mission to facilitate commercialization of all types of technologies and products utilized in the biofuels industry. So what our center is, we're really a public-private partnership. Or in other words, the public, the taxpayer, built the facility for utilization by the private sector.
Biofuels, just describe what that, people hear these terms and they may not know what they actually mean. To you, what is biofuel?
That's a great question, Lee. And biofuels, particularly ethanol from corn, has been in the headlines, particularly over the last week to 10 days. Biofuels is renewable fuel. Biofuel is something that you develop from a feedstock that is grown from Mother Nature, if you will, where we harvest sunshine and rain, and we convert it into a fuel. You know, the center was developed as primarily a corn-to-ethanol research center, but as policy has evolved, as the industry has evolved, our center has evolved as well, focusing a great deal of our time and our effort and our contractual work on advanced biofuels such as butanol, isobutanol, specialty chemicals. So we stay true to our roots, which is ethanol made from corn, but we've expanded and advanced our capabilities into additional biofuels as well.
Now, before, when you were talking about public-private, I understand the part about public because that tax monies were used in order to build the facility. I don't know if part of it was through SIUE that they put money in, or how that money got there, but it was basically tax money.
That is correct.
Built your facility. The private part, as I understand it, is that companies such as Monsanto might come to your facility and use that research facility, because they don't have a research facility like that.
That is correct.
You have capabilities that they don't have, and so they actually rent the space from you. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, Lee. Our facility was built out of a congressional directive, if you will. $14 million of federal money, matching $7 million through the Illinois Department of Commerce. So $21 million was the original pool that built the facility. And it did exactly what you just described. It created an environment. It created assets by which the private sector that didn't have those assets could come in and could rent, as you described, space, time, knowledge, and skills to evaluate their products and their technologies. And it's been extremely successful.
Do their people come, their technicians come and actually operate the facility, and it's just, or do you provide the personnel that actually perform the work and they just say how they want the work performed?
It's probably the most common question that we receive from our private sector clients is, number one, are our personnel allowed to come? Yes, we want them there. But secondly, are our personnel, are they allowed to press buttons, push dials, these sorts of things? And the answer to that is no. The facility, it is a public entity. It belongs to the taxpayer. Therefore, it is employees of the center that do all of the physical work inside the center.
The center employees SIUE employees? Or?
We are SIUE employees, correct.
Okay. So, let's see, excuse me. 2003, you open your doors, and you weren't there at that time.
That's correct.
There was a fellow by the name of Rodney Bothist,
correct,
who was the first director in your position, and then there was another lady that was there for a little while, and then you
and then me.
Right. So since you came there,
right.
what has happened? I guess you indicated that originally we were doing just research and how. I guess I really have to start from the beginning. Ethanol is a product that is naturally produced through a process almost like making whiskey.
That is correct.
Right.
Man has been producing ethanol from the beginning of time.
Ethanol is drinking alcohol, right?
It is.
Right, as opposed to methanol, which is a poisonous to human beings
that is
kind
correct.
of alcohol.
Right.
So you're creating drinking alcohol, but it's going to go into gasoline. It's mixed into gasoline
because it's denatured.
As an extender.
That is correct.
As an extender for fuel that goes into people's tanks.
And as a replacement for MTBE to get the oxygenate level up.
Well, we can get into that.
Right.
Actually, let's do it now. People have heard of this
MTBE.
Yes, MTBE.
Right.
What's that?
Well, MTBE, it was utilized as an oxygenate for decades. It's highly carcinogenic. It's very toxic. And there were episodes in the last decade and a half where around the country, even some locations geographically not too far from right here, where MTBE was found in the water supply. It was banned. And ethanol is the best renewable substitute for the MTBE and is utilized today in the state of Illinois in over 98% of our fuel supply. There's some level of ethanol blended in with those gallons of fuel.
Is there still anywhere pure gasoline going into tanks, or is it always got some mixture of something?
There is, and you can find gas stations, even some local ones, but you can find them across the state where it may say no ethanol added. We're not necessarily a fan of that label, but you certainly can find those, and for that group of consumers that's what they prefer, the choice is out there for them to utilize that fuel.
So then most of the gasoline then is what you're saying has some ethanol in it. I understand it's about 10%?
Up to about 10%.
10%
correct.
ethanol, 90% gasoline.
That is correct.
Okay. What's E85 then?
E85 is just the opposite. It's 85% ethanol with then a 15% gasoline.
Okay, and does your car run on that?
I do not currently have a flex fuel vehicle. No, I do not.
So ethanol can't be burned in a regular engine unless it has some adaptation to it. Is that right?
No, that's not accurate. Every engine, especially every automobile engine, can burn up to some level of ethanol.
No, I'm talking about the 85.
Oh, the E85.
Yeah.
Yes. Now on the E85, you're absolutely right. It requires what's described as an FFV, a flex fuel vehicle, and that flex fuel vehicle can burn literally any type of fuel with the exception of diesel that you would want to put in it. So in other words, any level of alcohol blended gasoline from 0% up to 85%, you can burn in that flex fuel vehicle.
Okay. Now, why is E85 a good thing? Other than, of course, it's good for your industry of producing ethanol.
It's definitely good for our industry.
Other than that, what is the value of E85 to the world as opposed to just using regular petroleum-based gasoline?
Sure. Well, I think we have to back up a bit from E85 and think about ethanol in general. For every billion gallons of ethanol that's produced, on average, gasoline prices drop by about 6 cents. So the ethanol blended in with the gasoline is a direct savings to the consumer. One of the things I hope we have the opportunity to talk about in a bit is a recent proposal by the Environmental Protection Agency on the ethanol requirement or the ethanol blend.
Go ahead.
So this past week, this past Friday, November 15th, the Environmental Protection Agency, they came out with a proposal that we are adamantly opposed to. And what this proposal is it would cut 1.4 billion gallons of ethanol production in 2014.
How do you cut it? I mean, our industry's not allowed to produce what they want?
Well, under the Renewable Fuel Standard and the one that we call Renewable Fuel Standard 2, RFS 2, which was signed into law December 19, 2007 by George W. Bush, there's a schedule in there. Some prefer to call it a mandate. Others prefer to maybe call it a requirement. I choose to view it as an opportunity. Mm-hmm. And what this schedule does is on an annual basis, up to the year 2002, it ramps up the amount of ethanol from corn, ethanol from other sources that we can talk about in a bit. And for the year 2014, the schedule called for up to 14.4 billion gallons of ethanol from corn. Mm-hmm. The EPA came out with a very irrational proposal just this past Friday, November 15th, in which they cut that proposed amount from 14.4 billion gallons down to 13. Now, let me tell you, Lee, what the reaction in the marketplace was.
Well, first, before you say that, I just need to better understand. Companies, it's company, not government, right? Companies produce ethanol, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And companies are producing whatever it is that they're doing this year, mm-hmm. and next year they were going to do this 14 billion gallons.
That is correct.
So how does EPA say, oh, well, they're saying you may not? Or are they saying we're only going to give you a tax advantage up to?
No, it has nothing to do with the tax advantage. It has to do with this is the amount that the EPA is going to allow to be blended in with gasoline.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, total.
Right.
So they've cut that amount. Mm-hmm. They've cut that amount from a 14.4 billion gallons down to 13 billion gallons.
Did they provide a rationale for this thinking?
Well, I believe that their proposal is totally irrational. Their proposal came right on the heels of an Associated Press hit piece, not only on our industry, but more importantly, a hit piece on production agriculture.
Well, I was going to say, and so let's just get into it now.
Sure.
Apparently, there are some in the environmental business that loved ethanol a decade ago that seem to have turned on you at this stage. And it seems from what my reading is that there's a couple of reasons. One has to do with the use of corn for your product, and there's these environmentalists are all upset that you're using corn which could otherwise go to as feed for animals, mm-hmm. and therefore you are driving up the cost of feed for animals because you're taking a bunch out of their availability, so the rest that is available, price goes up, supply and demand.
Right.
And the other, oh yes, you have been directing people because yellow corn is better for ethanol than white corn. The industry has been directing people to make more yellow corn or produce more yellow corn. And the white corn, which goes to tortillas in Mexico, mm-hmm. I couldn't believe it.
I know. I had a chuckle on that one as well.
That tortillas in Mexico, because there's less white corn available, the price of tortillas in Mexico went up, and that's a bad thing because those poor people down there now have to pay more for their tortillas.
Right. Well, having lived in South Texas for a number of years, I can tell you there certainly is no shortage of white corn. You know, verbiage like that I view as a trade barrier more than what it is a reality. But to come back to your points that you made about corn and about corn production, I agree with that 100%. I believe that a lot of this argument is not an anti-ethanol argument. I believe it's an anti-production agriculture argument. I believe that it's an attack on America's farmer. Just a couple statistics to keep in mind. with the constant rhetoric we hear about increase in prices. Well, first of all, the last time I checked, this was a capitalistic society. So it's market competition for the corn. That being said, corn prices today, as we sit here on Tuesday, November 19th of 2013, corn prices are actually lower than what they were on December 19th, 2007, when George Bush signed this into law. So there's some fallacy there on that this has driven up corn prices. The second thing is the demand for the corn. The livestock industry utilizes on average about 50% of our nation's corn supply. The net utilization of corn by the ethanol industry from the 2012 corn crop, keeping in mind a major drought year in 2012, was 26% of the corn supply. And where that shakes out, Lee, is that the ethanol industry is not taking corn at all away from the livestock industry. In fact, if anything, what the ethanol industry is doing is the ethanol industry is producing a feed for the livestock industry in the form of a product called distiller's grains. It's the co-product produced from ethanol production.
I was going to say the co-product, people used to say byproduct, it's not a byproduct, it's a co-product.
It's a true co-product.
Because you have created ethanol and this stuff that when you dry it is good to feed the pigs.
That's the pigs, cattle, dairies. It's a high form of digestible protein, 30+% protein. It's a high form of digestible energy. And in some sectors of our nation's livestock industry, they've not only grown to like the product, they've grown dependent upon the product.
Mm-hmm. So that brings us to switchgrass.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's start talking about now. So just so people understand what we've just switched gears to. You have been using corn since the beginning in order to create this ethanol alcohol, right? But people have been dreaming about the idea of using something that's not corn, but using something called switchgrass or some other kind of a fibrous stuff that grows, right? And apparently it costs less to get that stuff too, which I guess you're talking about weeds. So where do we stand on weed to alcohol?
Weeds to alcohol. That might be a new cash crop in the future. So what we're talking about is actually cellulosic feedstocks, or what some like to describe as non-starch types of feedstocks. The simplest way I think to think about it is something that can be converted into a fuel that's not a kernel of corn. It's probably the easiest way to think about it. You know, one of the things that I think that we always have to remind ourselves of is that there's not going to be a cellulosic ethanol industry. There's not going to be a switchgrass to ethanol industry if there wasn't first a corn to ethanol industry. It will always be three legs of the four-legged stool. That being said, one of the things that I think that our industry, and in particularly our research center, doesn't get nearly enough credit for are the advancements that we've made, particularly in the last 3 to 5 years on cellulosic ethanol. What our industry is waiting for, our industry is just simply waiting for the opportunity to produce these fuels at a commercial level. Proposals by the EPA this past Friday, that's catastrophic to our industry. Why? It sends out a message of uncertainty. It sends out a message of unrest.
Could this be that there are people in government who are trying to redirect away from liquid fuels? I mean, as hard as that would be to believe, there are some people who just feel, and I've talked to them here, who are not, they're not excited about the idea of liquid fuels being used for transportation. They have some idea that, boy, we can get into this battery technology or photovoltaic, direct photovoltaic kind of conversion of sun, you know, off the top of the car to drive the cars. Is that a possibility here?
I think there might be an element of truth to that, but all roads and all fingers point to these decisions are decisions that are being influenced by the petroleum industry, the oil lobby, and here's why.
What, they're saying they want larger percentages of gasoline to...
That's absolutely right, Lee. At the end of the day, what the ethanol industry has done...
But isn't the petroleum industry in the ethanol production business
That's
as well?
the strange oxymoron here. The petroleum industry is our industry's customer. We sell to them.
But don't they also manufacture? I mean,
there are some assets. There absolutely are some
Yeah.
ethanol assets that are owned by the petroleum industry.
Yeah.
That's right. What's happened though is as the ethanol industry has become so successful, so popular, we're an industry that here in the state of Illinois are employing over 54,000 people. We're a $5.6 billion industry in the state of Illinois. Across the nation, we're employing over 400,000 people. We're contributing $45 billion annually to the gross domestic product. What that means to the oil industry is we have a product that's popular, that the consumer wants, yet we've cut into the market share of the petroleum industry. At the end of the day, that's what this battle seems to be most about, is market share.
As cars become more fuel efficient too, you've got less and less gasoline, or at least technically, I guess that's the way it's supposed to work. You have less and less gasoline being used for each mile or each 100,000 miles that's being driven.
Yes.
And so they need to sell more gasoline, is what you're saying?
Lee, you're absolutely right, because gasoline consumption, it is on the steady decline for a number of reasons. One, our miles per gallon, our gas mileage is getting better. We've become more efficient. We've been more, as consumers, we've become more cost conscious. Maybe we're driving a little bit less. These factors are certainly driving our gasoline consumption down. Well, as gasoline consumption goes down and ethanol production goes up, and continues to grow in popularity, again, it's more and more market share of the oil and petroleum industry that our industry is taking. They're fighting to regain that market share. It's economics at the end of the day.
I'm old enough to remember when I was age 16 and I started driving, gasoline, you could go up and, like $3 would fill your tank. I mean, we're talking 33 cents. I bought gas at the cheapest, 18.9 per gallon, and when you look at $3 a gallon, it's no wonder that people don't want to buy as much gasoline, or just drive around for recreational purposes, because it costs a fortune now to go anywhere. People who drive regularly from say Edwardsville over to Westport in St. Louis County, or vice versa. That's, a $10, $15 trip, unless you have a really efficient car.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And again, I go back to just Friday afternoon, November 15th. At 2 p.m. Eastern time is when the Environmental Protection Agency announced this proposal about cuts in ethanol requirements. Within an hour in southwestern Illinois, gas prices rose. Madison, St. Clair, Monroe County, gas prices rose on average about 8 to 9 cents per gallon on the heels of that news. If you would annualize that, Lee, that comes out to $10.6 billion to the consumer. It's very real money that hits each one of us in the pocketbook. We as consumers need to be conscientious about those decisions and those things that are impacting our quality of life.
We got about 5 minutes to the end of time here. Are there areas that we haven't discussed yet that you would like to get into, because now's the time?
Sure. I think a few things. I think one area that we take great pride in is the training work that we're doing. Over the last half decade, we've trained over 600 people, unemployed, underemployed personnel. More than 93% of them are now directly employed in the biofuels industry. These proposals by EPA, it could cost these people jobs, real jobs, good paying jobs. One of the estimates that's come out is that if this proposal by EPA, if this is finalized, more than 37,000 jobs across this country will be lost. A $24 billion hit to our economy. We take great pride in the training that we're doing, and we feel an overwhelming amount of success when we see these folks employed. The second thing is this public-private partnership that we talked about early on in the interview. To date, and in the last half decade, more than 50 technologies, Lee, more than 50 technologies that have passed through the doors of our center are now out in the commercial marketplace. What impact are they having on the economy? The impact that they're having is more than 40,000 direct jobs have been created on these 50 technologies. More than $5 billion of annual revenue are being created by these technologies. The public-private partnership has been win-win. It's been a win for the taxpayer that started the center. It's a win back to the taxpayer in that it's creating jobs, it's creating revenue, it's creating a taxpayer. Those are a couple of very important points.
So, in your opinion, here in the last couple of minutes, is the ethanol industry going to survive?
The ethanol industry will survive for a couple of reasons. One, it's an industry that's literally been around since the beginning of time. Man has always been fermenting something. But you know, Lee, I had a conversation over the weekend with one of our stakeholders in a commodity and trade group. And the approach that they had on this is one that I found a bit interesting, but then I understood. They said, you know, if the EPA was going to do something, it's interesting that they did something that is so drastic that has rallied not hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people all across this country. And if there's one benefit that could possibly come out of this, it's the consumer awareness that it's created. The other thing that we're seeing is we're seeing a bipartisan uniting of Midwestern legislators. People for the moment are dropping the R or the D in front of their name and saying, wait a minute, this isn't good for the Midwest. This isn't good for the consumer. It's not good for my constituents. We need to band together and correct this wrong that's been proposed by the EPA. So stay tuned.
Well, it will be interesting. Again, one of the advantages of being older is that I actually remember when EPA was first created, and during the Nixon administration, and I also remember the Clean Air, Clean Water Act that was first proposed and then finally passed by Senator Muskie of Maine. The original purposes, at least the stated purposes at that time, was to actually clean up environmental damage, and that from what the original proposals were to what they are today, I mean, 95% of all the damage that had been done. Lake Erie was declared dead, now it's clean. Air is much, much, much cleaner than it used to be. And you would think that the EPA had done its job and it's time to close up shop.
In a sense. In a sense. And I think here close to home, another reason that we need to be very, very conscientious of this, there's efforts here in the state of Illinois right now, a very, very good bipartisan piece of legislation. It's been introduced in the State House, the Consumer Fuel Choice for Illinois, Senate Bill 52, House Bill 165. This is a bill that would return $135 million annually to Springfield. Why? Legislation that's been on the books for nearly 3 decades, Lee. It served its purpose. It's time to move on.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Really, it was instructive today. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it very much, Lee.
And to the audience, I've been speaking with John Caupert. He is the Executive Director of the National Corn-to-Ethanol Research Center. That's it. And they're located at SIUE Edwardsville. For those of you who saw this and want to show it to friends, we're going to be uploading this to YouTube. Go there and take a look. Thanks. Bye.